Good afternoon, everyone. I think I'm the first to say this on the stage, as it's just clocked midday. And welcome, Louise, joining us from Dubai virtually. So as we say around the proverbial fireside that we're going to have this chat, I think it's going to be quite exciting to really look into the future of what our cities will look like. And actually, I think there's a little bit of a future here with two female engineers on stage, so that is also very rare. And we're excited definitely to have you here. So I'll start a little bit, and thank you so much, EAPI, for having me. I feel like an imposter because I'm in the renewable energy space. But I'll give you a bit of background. I used to work for JLL in Australia and in Kenya for over 7 years. So of course, when JLL calls, I answer because we don't burn bridges, and it's great to see that they're here also really taking the conversation forward. We really want to touch today on sustainability and future cities, and how do we make our cities more resilient, inclusive, livable, walkable. How many people want to walk in their cities and not have to worry about whether there's a side pavement or whether they'll fall into a manhole, or, there's so many issues now with our cities, right? And they are really the heartbeat of our societies. So how do we make them more exciting, more livable, and more resilient? And today, Louise joins us with her wealth of knowledge, 22 years of experience. I have some tough questions for you, Louise, today, so I hope you're ready for me. And we only have about 20 minutes, so I will start now just to make sure that we have time and finish in time for lunch. So, Louise, welcome. Maybe you want to say a few words and open about yourself and also about the future of cities. Welcome.
Yeah, sure. As mentioned earlier, my background is engineering, and I know sustainability has a bit of a dark art to it. So I think sustainable engineering is how I class myself. And I'm really about putting tangible outcomes to how we implement sustainability, both on a building level and on a city level. Africa is going to be very interesting over the next few decades, and I guess our chat will discuss that in a bit of detail. But it's very different to a lot of cities in the world, on how that's really going to escalate. And I think your predecessor on the stage just mentioned that the population of Africa is going to double by 2050 to over 2.5 billion people, and how that accommodates them, and the urbanization around that, and how people move into cities as populations grow, will bring its challenges and opportunities, right? And if we can plan this in a great way with using some of the lessons learned around the world and across Africa, then we could really make an impact and make real changes to how we do things and how we implement existing cities and new cities across Africa.
Great, I absolutely agree. And with such a young population in Africa, we're going to have the youngest population by 2040 and 2050. Globally, we're hearing a lot of conversations around sustainability and green buildings, and it's quite exciting. But in Africa, we have many challenges, right? In South Africa right now, we have serious an energy crisis, load shedding. In other countries in the world, in Africa, we have unemployment issues. Really, is sustainability where we should be focusing now, or what's your thinking around that?
Well, I don't think we should see sustainability as a luxury. We should definitely be seeing it as a necessity. It doesn't have to cost more. It just has to be planned in a better way. And fundamentally, your first point was that there's big issues with energy. The same things are happening in other parts of the world, like Europe at the moment. And the first thing that they did was, how do we make our buildings more efficient? So the fact that you have a huge amount of renewable energy opportunities, and fast becoming one of the biggest renewable energy providers in the world, if we can kind of merge that with the opportunities of the upcoming cities and how we can make them really efficient, it could potentially be the perfect storm.
Absolutely, and actually, Africa has some of the world's best renewable energy resource. We have 60% of the world's best solar resource, and we know we have wind resource that can power the continent 250 times over. So I like to always throw that in there when I can, because we are rich in renewable, in renewable resource. Coming to what is happening regionally, Louise, we're seeing a lot of commitments in different regions, and what's your thinking around this? What's your opinion on what's happening across the different regions in the continent? And maybe you can shed some light on what's happening.
Yeah, sure. I think just to set context, Africa contributes between 2 and 3% of global greenhouse emissions. So whilst there's pressure of everyone to comply, we also need to understand our contribution at the moment and where we are at across Africa. Now, if we look at sustainable development goals, we're in Southern Africa, we're almost complying with most of those. There's a bit of a pushback on North Africa due to the number of large cities in the world, but overall, Africa is doing a lot better than most of its counterparts globally around the world. 33 of African countries have signed up to the Paris Agreement, again, for the mix of countries, and to make this big commitment without fundamental investment roadmaps is huge. Again, doing it now before the onset of, again, 20 cities being rolled out in Africa over the next, by 2030, to make these commitments now and implement them as the growth comes into play, both from a population and buildings perspective, really will be much more impactful than anyone else. And also bear in mind, I know this is about cities today, that cities account for 70% of global emissions. So if Africa is after China and will probably overcome China in the next 20 years on city growth, they have the potential to make the biggest impact going forward. I think, again, the stage today talked about lots of EDGE certification and different building codes, etc. So there is definitely different levels of compliance, and I think there just needs to be a next level of alignment of that. But generally, if we can keep rolling with the commitment, it will be much more positive than its counterparts, really.
Great, thank you, Louise. And you've mentioned that there's 33 countries that have already signed up to the Paris Agreement, so that's quite significant. Of course, more cities, because like even in Kenya, we have Kisumu, we have Nairobi, Mombasa, are all signed up to this, and this is great. So this is multiple cities per country, and if we have a large growing population, I think we'll be one of the largest populations by 2050. We've often seen that Africa tends to leapfrog, and coming from Kenya, we've seen the leapfrogging in the digital, in the mobile phone and banking sector, where we've gone straight from no phones to M-Pesa, right? And a lot of that innovation. But then legislation caught up after, right? And so now that is the kind of the challenge we have. So now, how important do you think legislation is now in driving the future of smart cities and sustainability? Do you think it will come after, like it has with in the case of M-Pesa, or is it going to be what drives the future of cities?
I think it'll be a mix of both. I think your leapfrog example is phenomenal. Probably Africa and India are two countries that really bypass the rest of the world in this regard. And if you take some examples of some other global cities that have already been set, and if commitments being made, there will be no choice but to leapfrog. Again, the opportunity to do it now as it's developing will also come. But I think with regards to legislation, I think building codes will really help to push where we're going, particularly on cities. There are a couple of countries like Morocco and Tunisia that have regulated building codes. I think most other countries are voluntary at the moment. So to enable kind of an equal playing field across cities, I think building codes need to become mandatory and legislative.
Okay. Great to hear, and thank you for sharing that. But Louise, let me take you back. I feel a bit crazy saying that we're going to start from scratch, in terms of sustainability, and is there things that we can learn from, right? Is there places that we can learn from? Are there things that we can learn from in terms of even African traditions that we can learn from in regard to sustainability and the future of our cities?
Absolutely. And if you look at some of the innovation that's coming out across the world now on materiality, urbanization, regeneration, a lot of them are actually coming out of Africa. Najdi architecture is based on mud materials that have a huge U value potential. I guess from an efficiency perspective, we know that traditional African housing is probably one of the most thermally efficient building properties in the world. So there's lots to learn. Again, we shouldn't be reinventing the wheel. We can take cities like Boston, who are one of the best performing cities in the world on sustainability. But remember, they've missed the opportunity to leapfrog, as you say. We can now take some of their lessons from steel production or technology that weren't available at the time of some of their commitments as well. So I think it's going to be a bit of a balance of both.
Great. And Louise, coming back to financing of these, future cities and buildings, and you actually made a great point that we can learn from some of the traditional African architecture that we had. So there's certain elements of, how we used to build, let's say, mud huts that could go into green building. And so we don't really have to start from scratch. But now looking at making projects bankable and financing these projects, that's the challenge here. How do we leverage, the financing that is out there to be able to bring financing into the space as well?
I think this is fundamental, and I did go to COP in Africa last year, and it was one of my biggest frustrations. One being the green loans don't really have a differential to brown loans at the moment. So I think the value of carbon is really going to escalate in the next few years. Right now, everyone's focused on cash dollar, but in the next few years, there will be things like carbon taxes and potentially commitment penalties that may come into play. But when I try and sell sustainability to clients, I always sell it with a return on investment. What are you getting for this? If it's an existing building, you could save on your energy bill. If it's a new build, it will increase your valuation. If it's a new or existing building, it will increase your rents, and this is proven. So it is bringing tangible value also to buildings and cities that we can see.
Great. It's great to hear, and we are seeing that also in Kenya, where green buildings are selling quicker or leasing faster with more premium clients. So that's fantastic. Coming to the end of our conversation, Louise, I wanted to ask you, what are some of the key takeaways that you can share with developers here in this space and in the room about the future cities and the inception of projects and their thinking even as they start their projects?
There's obviously lots of things. I think again, it's not a huge monetary issue. It's about planning, ensuring that the design is right in the first place. We're going to be merging old with new in Africa. So if we can plan for passive design across big urban spreads, if we can look at planning our infrastructure based on renewable energy and diversifying where we can, technology and data now allows us to really plan and optimize systems and buildings to a much greater depth than before. One example is we recently worked on a digital twin in Saudi Arabia, and we looked that if we used all the analytical data across traffic and buildings, we could save approximately 70% of the energy that was peak loading across that city. So again, planning and circular economy is really important. That's on materials. You have a vast amount of supply chain in Africa, so we really need to leverage that. That's on technology and bring that in as much as we can. I think again, renewable energy, anything that we can do to keep it within the region, and circularity, reuse, all of those things that bring value to Africa, to that city and to those people. Again, that creates jobs, that reduces your global footprint, and that brings value, I guess, would be fundamental.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much, Louise. And I've left 1 minute just for any questions that might be in the audience. Do we have any questions for Louise? No? Okay. Louise, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it. And we look forward to seeing more future cities become more sustainable in Africa. Thank you, everybody, for your time.
Thank you very much.